The ceremonial hall stretched before Adrian like something from a fever dream. Crystalline architecture caught and fractured light into impossible colors, refracting into hues that had no names on earth. Hundreds of Nexaries stood in traditional garments, their silver skin gleaming under the ambient glow of the great chamber. And at the center of it all stood a woman who looked like she had been carved from moonlight itself, radiating authority with every breath. High Consul Vaya stood on the dais, her silver skin gleaming beneath the hall's luminous glow, those characteristic elongated ears marking her as high caste, proclaiming her status with crystalline clarity. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world, from generations of ancestors who had shaped worlds and pulled their people back from the brink of oblivion. Her voice, when she spoke, resonated through the space with practiced ease, each word calibrated for maximum impact yet delivered with apparent simplicity. Dr. Adrian Cross, honor guest of the Nexary people. She gestured to the assembled women standing in careful formation to her right, their expressions a mixture of hope, anxiety, and barely contained excitement. The Festival of Reaching grants you the ceremonial privilege of choice. You may select any unmarried woman present to serve as your companion and guide during your stay among us. This honor reflects our gratitude for your presence and your people's friendship. Adrienne's translator earpiece rendered her formal Nexary into English, but he didn't need translation to understand the ceremony's basic structure. He'd been briefed extensively during his pre-mission preparation. Select a young woman from the assembled candidates, and she would serve as his cultural guide and companion for the duration of his month-long diplomatic mission. It would bring honor to her family, facilitate cultural exchange, and fulfill an ancient tradition that had weathered 3 centuries of careful preservation. The assembled women, perhaps 40 of them, stood with varying expressions. Some were clearly excited by the possibility, their eyes bright and hopeful. Others looked resigned to disappointment, understanding statistically their chances were minimal. All of them were young, beautiful by Nexary standards, and performing for his benefit with the careful precision of those who understood the weight of this moment. Adrian scanned the candidates, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with each passing second. This whole ceremony felt like a beauty pageant mixed with a job interview, neither of which he enjoyed. His anthropological training told him to respect the cultural significance of this ancient tradition. His personal ethics told him this was uncomfortably close to treating people like commodities, like objects to be selected rather than individuals to be chosen. Then his eyes moved past the carefully arranged candidates to Vaya herself. She stood apart from the assembled women, untouchable in her authority, completely confident that this ceremony would proceed exactly as it had for generations before and would for generations after. She wasn't performing, wasn't hoping, wasn't even really paying attention to him anymore. Her gaze had shifted to one of her advisors, probably already moving on to the next item on her endless schedule, her mind processing political implications and administrative duties with the efficiency that had kept her at the helm of her people. Adrian made a decision that would later be described as either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, depending on who was telling the story and what political camp they belonged to. "I choose you," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the chamber, pointing directly at Vaya. The hall went silent. Not the respectful silence of ceremony, but the shocked silence of something fundamentally breaking, of protocols shattered and assumptions overturned in a single breath. Vaya's head snapped around, her golden eyes wide with genuine surprise, the first unguarded expression he'd seen on her face. "I'm sorry, I choose you, High Consul." Adrian kept his voice level and polite, completely serious despite the magnitude of what he was saying. "If the ceremony grants me choice of any unmarried woman present, I choose you." Color shifted across Vaya's silver skin, a flush visible even to Adrienne's untrained eye, a physical manifestation of shock radiating across her features. Her mouth closed, open again. For maybe 3 seconds, she looked completely lost, her political training temporarily overwhelmed by genuine disorientation. Then her training reasserted itself, and her expression smoothed into careful neutrality, a mask descending like a shield. "Dr. Cross, I believe there's been a misunderstanding." Her voice was just slightly too controlled, revealing the effort it took to maintain composure. "I am the officiant of this ceremony, not a participant. The selection is meant to be made from the assembled candidates." She gestured to the young women, all of whom were watching with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed delight at this unprecedented drama unfolding before them. "Is there a law against choosing you?" Adrian asked simply, his straightforward approach cutting through the layers of protocol and expectation. Vaya hesitated, glanced at her advisors, who were already whispering frantically among themselves, their hands moving in agitated gestures of concern and consultation. One of them, an elderly Nexary with elaborate facial markings that denoted centuries of political experience, approached and spoke rapidly in Nexary, his tone urgent and emphatic. Vaya responded in the same language, her tone sharp and clipped. The advisor gestured clearly, arguing, his words tumbling over one another in rapid succession. Vaya's expression grew increasingly tight, the mass beginning to fracture under the pressure of unprecedented circumstance. Finally, she turned back to Adrian, her decision clearly reached. There's no explicit prohibition, but Dr. Cross, I am the High Consul. My position is that a yes or a no. Adrian asked directly, cutting through the hedging and the careful diplomatic language. He watched her struggle with it, watched pride warring with political necessity, watched irritation fighting with something that might have been curiosity, perhaps even interest. She was trapped, and they both knew it. Refusing would insult the honor guest, potentially damage the fragile human-Nexary relationship that this entire mission was built upon, and could create diplomatic incidents that would reverberate across both civilizations. But accepting meant placing herself in a role she'd never imagined occupying, breaking traditions that had stood unbroken for centuries. This is highly irregular, she said finally, each word measured and careful. I've been told I specialize in irregular. Vaya's eyes narrowed slightly, and Adrian caught a flash of what might have been amusement before she suppressed it, wrestling it back under the surface of her diplomatic composure. Very well, Dr. Cross. I accept your choice, though I must inform you that you have made things remarkably complicated. I appreciate the warning, and I expect you to follow all proper protocols during our arrangement. I'll do my best. Vaya looked like she wanted to say more, but was too aware of their audience, conscious of how every word would be analyzed and discussed in the hours and days to come. Instead, she turned to the assembly and announced in formal Nexary that the ceremony was concluded. The honor guest had made his selection, and everyone was dismissed. The crowd dispersed with the kind of excited murmuring that promised this story would be spreading across the planet by evening, moving faster than light-speed communications, carried in the voices of those who understood they had witnessed something unprecedented. As people filed out, Adrian approached the dais. Vaya watched him come with an expression that suggested she was rapidly reassessing everything she thought she knew about humans, trying to fit this inexplicable action into any framework that made sense. Dr. Cross. Her tone was professional, but there was an edge to it, sharp as obsidian. Perhaps you could explain what you hope to accomplish with that display. Would you believe I just wanted to choose someone who wasn't performing for me? No. Adrian smiled, and it was genuine, without pretense or calculation. Fair enough. Can we talk somewhere private? Vaya studied him for a long moment, taking his measure, trying to understand his motivations, and whether he was worth the complication. Then, despite everything, she nodded. Follow me, and try not to cause any more diplomatic incidents before we reach my office. No promises. He caught another flash of something in her expression. Irritation definitely, but also something else. Interest maybe, or the beginning of respect for his audacity. Either way, Adrian thought this was going to be an interesting month. Vaya's office was somehow exactly what Adrian expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Formal walls lined with historical texts in careful arrangement, ceremonial artifacts displayed with museum precision, furniture designed more for appearance than comfort, but arranged with clear intention. Yet there were personal touches that humanized the space in unexpected ways. A small half-dead plant struggling on the windowsill, fighting for life in the artificial light. A data pad covered in handwritten notes rather than typed text, suggesting someone who still valued the personal touch of handwriting. A cup of something that smelled like Nexary tea, gone cold and forgotten, sitting on the edge of her desk as evidence of a life spent in perpetual motion. She gestured to a chair that looked uncomfortable and was precisely as unwelcoming as it appeared. Then she sat behind her desk, fingers steepled, expression carefully neutral, the mask firmly back in place. Explain, she said simply. The ceremony made me uncomfortable. Adrian began, choosing his words carefully. Selecting someone like they were an object for evaluation and choice. I'm aware humans have complicated feelings about our traditions. Her tone suggested this wasn't the first time she'd heard the critique, but the festival of reaching is an honor. The women who participate do so voluntarily, and being chosen brings prestige to their families. I'm sure, but it still felt wrong to me. So, I chose the only person in that hall who could tell me no if they wanted to, who had actual power to refuse. Vaya blinked, clearly not having considered this particular angle. That's not entirely logical. Anyone could have refused, could they? Really, without social consequences, without disappointing families, without potential political ramifications. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, reconsidering. Her expression shifted slightly, acknowledging a point she couldn't refute. You're more observant than I expected. I'm an anthropologist. Observation is kind of my job. And choosing me was your way of protesting the ceremony, partly. Also, Adrian hesitated, then decided on honesty. I wanted to learn about Nexary culture from someone who actually lives it at the highest level, not someone performing a cultural exchange script for the visiting human. So, you chose me for educational purposes. Her tone was flat, deliberately reductive. Among other reasons, and those would be? Adrian met her eyes directly. You look like the only person in that room who wasn't expecting to be chosen. I'm contrary enough to find that appealing. Vaya stared at him for a long moment, processing this explanation, turning it over in her mind like an unfamiliar artifact. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. A short, sharp sound that seemed to surprise her as much as him, breaking through her carefully maintained composure. You're either remarkably bold or remarkably stupid, Dr. Cross. I haven't decided which. Most people settle on both. I'm beginning to see why. She stood, moving to the window, her back to him, staring out at the city that spread below her office, a city she had governed with careful precision for so long. You've created a situation that's going to be politically complicated. Traditional factions will be outraged. Progressive factions will be delighted, and I will be expected to manage all of it while also fulfilling the ceremonial duties you've now obligated me to. I apologize for the complication. Do you? She turned to face him. Because you don't sound sorry. I'm sorry it's difficult for you. I'm not sorry I chose you. Something flickered in her expression again. Surprise, or maybe something else entirely. She studied him like he was a puzzle she hadn't quite figured out, a problem in need of solving. You're very direct for a diplomat. I'm a terrible diplomat. I'm an anthropologist. They stuck me in diplomatic clothing because I speak 4 alien languages, and apparently that's close enough. That explains some things. Vaya moved back to her desk, but didn't sit, standing with the desk between them like a barrier she couldn't quite let go of. Very well, Dr. Cross. You've made your choice, and I've accepted. For the next month, I will serve as your guide and companion as tradition dictates. But we will maintain appropriate professional boundaries, and you will follow my lead on all cultural protocols. Agreed. She paused, and her next words came more slowly, more carefully. And Dr. Cross, try not to make any more unprecedented choices without warning me first. I'll do my best, High Consul. Somehow I doubt that. As Adrian left her office, he caught her expression in the reflection of a decorative panel, a moment of unguarded honesty. Confused, irritated, and maybe, just maybe, a little intrigued. It was more genuine than anything he'd seen in the ceremonial hall. This was definitely going to be an interesting month. The first 3 days were a masterclass in professional distance. Vaya showed Adrian historical sites with the precision of a tour guide who'd memorized every talking point, introduced him to scholars who delivered prepared remarks, facilitated meetings with government officials who adhered to diplomatic scripts, and maintained perfect composure throughout every interaction. She was an excellent guide, knowledgeable, articulate, efficient, and completely unreachable behind the wall of professionalism she'd erected. She was also clearly treating their entire arrangement like an extended diplomatic meeting rather than any kind of real cultural immersion, keeping him at arm's length with the expertise of someone who'd spent a lifetime maintaining appropriate distance. On the 4th day at yet another museum, Adrian finally called her on it. You're performing, he said as they stood before a display of ancient Nexary art, his voice cutting through the carefully curated presentation. Vaya's expression didn't change, her mask remaining firmly in place. I'm educating you about our culture. You're giving me the official tour, the same information any diplomat would get. That's not what I chose you for. She turned to face him fully, her golden eyes unreadable. And what exactly did you choose me for, Dr. Cross? To understand what it's actually like to be Nexary. Not the sanitized cultural exchange version, the real version. And you believe I can provide that? I believe you're the only person on this planet who can tell me the truth without worrying about diplomatic consequences. You're the High Consul. What are you afraid of? It was a calculated provocation, and Vaya's eyes narrowed at the directness of it. I'm not afraid of anything. Then why are we spending another afternoon looking at pottery instead of you actually talking to me? This pottery represents, I don't care about the pottery. Vaya. He used her first name deliberately, watching her reaction shift at this breach of formality. I care about understanding your people. You, not the position, not the official line. You. Vaya was silent for a long moment, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the calculation happening beneath it. Then you're remarkably persistent. I've been told. She studied him, and something shifted in her expression, a decision being reached. Fine. Follow me. She led him out of the museum, through winding streets that grew progressively less polished, less manicured, into a district that was clearly not on the official tour that most diplomats would never see. They stopped at a small establishment that Adrienne's translator identified as something between a cafe and a bar, a place that catered to locals rather than visitors. Inside, Nexary civilians looked up in surprise at seeing their High Consul, then quickly returned to their conversations with the studied indifference of people who'd learned not to stare at power, respecting her privacy even as they noted her presence. Vaya ordered something in rapid Nexary, gestured Adrienne to a corner booth with the ease of someone who came here regularly. This is where I come when I need to remember what normal feels like, she said quietly, each word measured and honest. When I need to not be High Consul for an hour. Does that happen often? Not as often as I'd like. She accepted 2 cups from the server, pushed one toward Adrienne. Try it. It's made from fermented grains. You'll probably hate it. He tried it. She was right. That's terrible. It's an acquired taste. Most off-worlders can't stomach it. I didn't say I couldn't stomach it. I said it was terrible. There's a difference. Vaya's lips twitched almost into a smile, a crack in her composure that felt significant. You're very strange, Dr. Cross. Adrienne, if we're drinking terrible grain alcohol in unofficial occasions, we can probably use first names. Adrienne. She tried the name, testing it in her mouth, making it her own. Then she took a sip of her own drink. What do you want to know? What's it like being High Consul? Not the public version, the real version. Vaya was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts, deciding what she was willing to reveal. Exhausting, lonely, necessary. She turned her cup in her hands, the gesture revealing vulnerability in its subtlety. My people nearly went extinct 3 centuries ago. We survived by being careful, by building strict protocols, by making sure everyone knew their place and role. That structure saved us, but it also she trailed off, leaving the thought hanging like an unfinished melody, trap you sometimes. She met his eyes directly, and in that moment, the full weight of what she carried became visible. I was raised to be High Consul, trained from childhood. It's all I've ever been, and it's important, necessary work. But some days I wonder what it would be like to just be someone, anyone else. Is that why you looked so shocked when I chose you? Partly. Nobody chooses the High Consul. The High Consul chooses. She smiled slightly, sadly, a smile that carried the weight of understanding. You violated every assumption I had about how that ceremony would go. Sorry. Don't be. It was refreshing. Terrifying, but refreshing. They talked until the establishment closed, real conversation for the first time, words flowing without the barrier of protocol or political necessity. Adrienne learned about Nexary politics and the factions that Vaya navigated with constant precision, about the weight of representing a species that almost didn't survive, about the responsibility that kept her awake at night, and the burden that never truly lifted from her shoulders. Vaya learned about Earth's chaotic political landscape and the beautiful mess of democracy, about Adrienne's former career as a university professor and his decision to join diplomatic service because, as he put it, someone needed to explain to politicians that alien species were actually people, not problems to be solved. When they finally left, walking through quieter streets back toward the government district, Vaya said quietly, "Thank you." For what? For seeing me, not the position. Me. Adrienne smiled, and it was completely sincere. That's what I chose you for. I'm beginning to understand that. They walked in comfortable silence, the kind that spoke of genuine connection, and something between them had shifted. Professional distance was being replaced by something more genuine, more dangerous, more real. The armor was beginning to come down, one piece at a time. On the 7th day, Vaya took Adrienne somewhere she'd never taken another off-worlder, a place sacred and deeply personal. The Archive of Silence, a memorial to the millions of Nexary lost in the near-extinction event 3 centuries prior, stood as a testament to survival and remembrance. It was sacred space, deeply personal, and she wasn't entirely sure why she was sharing it with this human who had turned her life upside down, but she found herself leading him through its halls anyway. Adrian walked through the memorial with reverence, reading names carved into crystalline surfaces, looking at holographic images of lives lost, faces frozen in time, stories that had nearly become silent forever. He asked careful questions, respectful questions, the questions of someone who understood the weight of what they were witnessing. And when Vaya finally explained what this place meant to her people, to her specifically as someone who carried the weight of ensuring they never came that close to oblivion again, her voice cracked just slightly, revealing the emotion she normally kept locked away. She expected him to offer platitudes or try to fix it, to minimize her grief with well-meaning words. Instead, he just sat beside her on a memorial bench and let the silence hold space for her grief, offering presence rather than solutions. "I'm not supposed to show this," she said finally, her words barely above a whisper. "High Consuls don't cry. Everyone cries. Some people just hide it better. I've gotten very good at hiding. I've noticed." He didn't look at her, giving her privacy, even while sitting next to her, a courtesy that meant more than he probably realized. "For what it's worth, I think you carry it remarkably well. But that doesn't mean it's not heavy." Vaya found herself crying then, quietly, briefly, but genuinely, tears that had been held back for far too long, and Adrian simply sat with her, not treating her grief as weakness or advantage, just as trust given and received, honoring the vulnerability she was offering him. When she'd recovered her composure, she said, "Thank you for not making this awkward. Grief isn't awkward. It's honest. You're very wise for someone who drinks terrible grain alcohol without complaint. I contain multitudes." This time, she actually laughed, and it felt good. Felt real. Felt like something she hadn't allowed herself in far too long. It was the sound of armor being willingly set aside, of choice made freely. The festival of reaching officially ended that evening, and their ceremonial arrangement was complete by the strict letter of tradition. Adrian could return to regular diplomatic activities with a different guide, following protocol as it was meant to be followed. But when the official notification came through, Vaya found herself using her authority to assign herself as his continued liaison for the remainder of his mission. Her advisors questioned the decision, their voices rising in concern and remonstration. Vaya ignored them, exercising the prerogative of her position to make choices that seemed illogical to everyone but herself. Over the following weeks, they spent more time together, and conversations deepened with each encounter. Barriers lowered slowly, carefully, but inexorably. The attraction that had been present from the start, buried under protocol and shock and professional distance, surfaced gradually when Adrian finally admitted that he'd chosen her not just for philosophical or anthropological reasons, but because the moment he saw her commanding that ceremony, completely confident and untouchable, he'd wanted to know if she'd let herself be known, if the person beneath the position was worth the complication. Vaya responded by kissing him, a choice that violated several protocols and would cause political complications she could already predict. She didn't care. Their relationship became public knowledge within hours, causing exactly the scandal Vaya had anticipated. Traditional factions protested loudly, their voices echoing through every official channel. Progressive factions celebrated, seeing in their union a symbol of change and evolution. The media coverage was intense and unrelenting, analyzing every moment, every gesture, every implication. Vaya handled it all with the political skill that had made her High Consul in the first place, navigating the competing demands with precision and grace. But now, with Adrian beside her, reminding her that strength didn't require isolation, that vulnerability could coexist with authority, she found the burden easier to carry. When Adrian's mission eventually ended, moving inexorably toward conclusion despite their wishes, they faced reality. What happened next? "I could request an extended assignment," Adrian offered, laying out the practical options. "Another few months, maybe longer. That would just delay the problem, not solve it. Then what do you want to do?" Vaya was quiet for a long moment, considering the weight of her answer, understanding what it meant to voice this desire aloud. "Then I want to take a sabbatical. Come to Earth. Understand your world the way you try to understand mine. High Consuls can take sabbaticals. This one can. I haven't taken leave in 8 years. I'm owed approximately 4 months, and I'm the High Consul. Who's going to stop me? Your advisors will have collective heart attacks, probably. I'll make sure medical is standing by." She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Adrian, you taught me something important. Being chosen, really chosen, by someone who sees past the armor to who you actually are isn't weakness. It's a gift. And I want to choose you back properly, without ceremonies or traditions or political necessity. Just you and me. You're sure this is going to complicate your life? You already complicated my life. Might as well be complicated together. When they announced Via's sabbatical, the political response was chaotic and intense. But Via, for the first time in her career, found she didn't care what the traditional factions thought, what the conservative voices whispered, what the old guard predicted. She'd spent her entire life being what her people needed. Now she was going to be what she needed. On Earth, she experienced being anonymous for the first time in decades, just another alien visitor, not the High Consul, not the weight of 3 centuries of survival on her shoulders. She and Adrian traveled through cities and countrysides, argued about anthropology and politics and everything in between, introduced her to terrible Earth food that she grew to love precisely because of its imperfection, and built something real from the foundation of that impossible choice. Years later, when people asked how they met, Adrian always said he chose the only person who didn't expect to be chosen, the one standing apart from the crowd, the one who carried the weight of worlds on her shoulders. Via always said he chose the only person stubborn enough to match his audacity, the one brave enough to see her, and choose her anyway. Both were right, and both were grateful that one human had the courage to say, "I choose you," to the woman who thought herself above choosing, and that she'd been brave enough to choose him back, to set down the weight for a moment, and let herself want something for herself. Sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is letting yourself be vulnerable with someone who proves they'll honor that vulnerability. Adrian chose Via when she thought herself unchosen, when she stood apart from the crowd thinking herself separate from the rules of desire and choice. Via chose Adrian when she finally let herself want something for herself, when she placed down the crown for long enough to discover who she was beneath the title. And together they chose a future neither had imagined possible, a life built on the foundation of one impossible choice, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly and choosing them anyway, of being willing to be chosen back, of the courage it takes to be vulnerable with someone who proves worthy of that trust. In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where countless civilizations rose and fell, where protocols and traditions held species together, sometimes it took one moment of beautiful audacity to remind everyone that the most powerful thing any being could do was choose to be known, and to choose someone back in return.